So, my name's John. Hi. I'm here today to talk about some things that might help you, and sort of if you're thinking about sort of starting a company and go, so I've not got time for all of this stuff. It's really hard. I've not got time if I'm doing it as a side thing to a day job where there's so much to do. We always worry about how much time we have, and hopefully some of the stuff that I talk about today will help you see that it's not just about time. Time is a malleable substance that we can do things with. So what do? Why am I here? On a Sunday, which is really weird to be talking on a Sunday. I'm still in kind of like Sunday mode. So I run a company called Smithery, which is based around making things people want rather than making people want things. So I used to work at an agency as Chief Innovation Officer and found that I could only sort of do the things that it said under the agency's name on the door. Whatever you sort of tried to solve for companies had to be media or digital or advertising or product design or whatever. When actually, what's more helpful for companies nowadays, especially big companies, is to sort of, okay, so why don't we just help you make some things that people want rather than making people want the things that you think are still relevant. So, Smithery is helpfully described as this. It's the work of and goods made by a smith. So if that is the work of, then the goods made are artifact cards. And this was I think you all have? Oh, holding up. Some people, and they're up there as well. This is brilliant. I'm stealing this. This is a brilliant idea. But stealing is fine. Stealing and adding something new and stealing from far away. And the whole idea of the cards I started it, it's an accidental thing. I started it just in one workshop. I wanted people to draw things out rather than use words, and I wanted them to make something that they actually believed in rather than just play the post-it note game of sort of like, I know this game. You give me a massive stack of post-it notes. I just write ideas until you decide I've come up with the idea you want me to come up with. So people had kind of gamed that a little, and I think people knew what the expectation was. I wanted people to commit to the things and believe in the things they were putting on the artifacts they were putting in the middle of the table. So it just started with blank playing cards, and then people started taking them out of workshops. So it reached the end of the workshop and people would sidle up to you and go, are you finished with them? Are they ours? Can we have them? And so on. And so I started losing boxes and boxes out the back of workshops I was using. I was like, maybe this is a thing. So I never set out to make them a thing. They sort of, they just became a thing. And it was about reacting to how people used them and what they did. So really sort of a lot of the stuff I think about around artifact cards are post-rationalised more than anything else. It's because it's sort of it was not set up with any great plan. It was just sort of okay, so what's happening here? Watching people react to the thing that you do is more important than sort of sitting on your own sweating out the thing that you do in the first place. So post-rationalising, I think there's something quite interesting in them about the space between work and play. So suddenly they've just become this tactile thing that people understand the form of cards, and they understand that you play games with them and move them around and make patterns or maps or look for hands and runs and flushes and so on. So it's tapped into a squeaky door. It's just tapped into, I think, something that is innate and built in everyone. That sort of like culture has determined that cards are a thing, and so therefore just by accident I have also tapped into that with the cards. So I guess I spend less time now worrying if they work, because there's so many people have used them for different things. I just every so often, weekly, I come across somebody who's just used them for something that I've never thought, we could use them for that before. Because people are brilliant. You give people things and they're just fantastically inventive, and they just go, we could do this thing with them. And then they send you messages as well. There's not a product development roadmap. There's just kind of a list of emails that people are going, you know what you should do? These are great, but you should do this with them. And you go, you're totally fucking right. So more emails is brilliant, because people just send you feedback on the thing, and you can help orientate where it's going from that. So I spend more of the time wondering why they work than worrying if they work, and just exploring different avenues. And what are they doing that is so pertinent for people in this epoch, in this era of how we are working. All through August, I did a really stupid thing. I said I was going to write a blog post a day on a weird woolly theory which I'd sort of like noted down in a card. And it started with 2 books by Stuart Brand, if people know him. Big fist pump at the back. Is that Stuart Brand? The recognised at last. So he is classic old school Silicon Valley guy. He'd written 2 books which I'll talk about now. I won't go into the whole career history, but one was called How Buildings Learn, and one was called Clock of the Long Now, which are both great books and really worth a read. But in them he uses the same concept of layers, of how layers move at different speeds. He says, so in How Buildings Learn, he says, so the thing that never changes about a building is where it is. That's the slowest moving layer of all. The structure is the next layer. That moves really slowly over like decades and decades and decades. Then you've got the skin, then you've got the services, then you've got the interior design stuff and how it looks and feels, and then you've got the stuff, just the things on tables between. And they all move at different layers, and the layers have to respect each other and sort of like fast proposes and slow disposes. And then he repeats the trick when he talks in The Clock of the Long Now about groups of people, civilizations, how the sort of like culture as a whole is a big, slow-moving beast. But inside that, you've got governance and finance and then fashion. And again, they all move at these different speeds. So I was just thinking that sort of like perhaps thinking about people and space together means you can link the slow stuff to the slow stuff and the fast stuff to the fast stuff. So when you think about companies, there's sort of like this stuff on the table, the things between us all in meetings are the things that dictate the daily actions we do, just the habits we have. Whereas the slow stuff, the culture of the company, is the stuff that changes the structure or even where a company is. And that's really, really slow. And I wondered if you could sort of like break that out into a matrix and explore what would happen when you took fast people behaviour and played out some slow space behaviour and how you could start changing the way that companies work. I did write a blog post a day on that. I actually managed it. It nearly killed me. And I was nearly divorced. Not nearly divorced. Close though. It was too much. Don't do it. But it made me think. It made me think, so I have to work at that rate, so I have to get a new thing. So it just sort of like, it forced you to stumble into areas where you hadn't previously thought about things before. One of those things was this. Does everyone recognise that basic equation from high school physics? No? Were you paying attention? So it's d equals r times t, or sometimes d equals s times t. So d is distance, how far we'll get. R is rate, how quickly we'll go. It's different in Australia. Yeah. That's why, you see, you're all Australian, that's why you don't. And T is time, how long we've got. So in the context of our work, it's sort of like, this is how far we'll get, this is how quickly we'll go, and this is how long we've got. And all through my career, it seems, in whatever sort of company I've worked at, people only bother about that. They only ever say sort of like, okay, we just work as fast as we work. So therefore we bill by hours or days or whatever else. We just sort of like, it's going to take this amount of time. We only, this sort of task, it only ever works at this, in this realm, so therefore we have to sort of, let's say it's a 5-day task or a 10-day task. Or you need 20 man days to do it. No one really bothers about that. How quickly we go. It's just taken as a presumption of sort of that we work how fast as we work. I started thinking, by changing the space that we work in, can we change the rate that we work at? So by changing the things around us, can we make ourselves go quicker for a prescribed task that we think used to take that amount of time? It led me into this idea of flow engines. Can I have a show of hands of who knows anything or have heard the term flow? About half people. So those half people probably know more than me, because I was writing a blog post a day and all my knowledge on stuff now comes from Wikipedia entries. Which is fine, because loads of clever people have sort of like worked out the very quickest way you can explain a difficult concept in one page to people who just come along and try and gather information. What I got into was the idea that the flow engine is a way to turn creative energy into productive forward motion, to make yourself go quicker. So, what is flow? Flow, in which a person performing an activity is fully immersed in a feeling of energised, focused, full involvement and enjoyment in the process. So basically, it's just, you will all know that sensation when you are just working at something and you look up and it's an hour later than you thought it was. Because you're just there. You're all into something. You just keep going. Nothing can distract you. It's like a superpower. The guy who's done most of the running on the theory, whose name is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, he's Hungarian. It's like the Hungarian James Bond. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Talks about this thing. So the sense of time disappears. This is a really good state to be in. So he did lots of research among artists and other sort of like creatives. Said, how do you get into that state? What happens? Another guy called Stephen Kotler has written recently a book which has got the worst title of all time if you want left-leaning liberal people to pick it up. It's called The Rise of Superman. Fucking hell. Really? But what's interesting is about he identified 17 flow triggers. So there was 3 environmental, 4 psychological, 11 social, and then 1 creative one, which when you read it, it's sort of like one creative one was just basically, hey, be creative. What? But the 3 environmental ones were sort of like honed into this idea of space. So how do you hack the space in which you work to get people into this sense of flow more readily? This, of course, is thinking about the cards, most obviously, but I think it works across lots of other things that we can do. So the 3 that he talks about are high consequences, rich environment, and embodiment. So that first trigger of consequences is possibly the most obvious thing we can do, and yet we do it so infrequently. It's basically just saying, what do I need to do, and what happens if I don't? Just sitting down and expressing at the beginning of every task or every project what I need to do and what happens if I don't. And what you're trying to aim for is this corridor between boredom and anxiety. If something is too easy, yeah, I've done that before. Oh, this is easy, I'll do it another day. Oh, whatever else. If something is too hard, you get the opposite effect. Fuck it, I'll never be able to do that. I can't build an app. I can't build a commerce website. I can't do it. So it's just out with our realms. So it's finding that flow channel. And that can be actually different ways of doing it. It's not just about difficulty. I think it can be also about time. So you say to people, right, that thing that you know you can do, you've got half the time you usually have to do it. Give yourself half a day rather than a day. Give yourself an hour rather than 2. And method as well. Say, take that thing that you usually do in one way and just write a poem about it. Draw it as a picture. Make a cartoon of it. Just shift the method. People know how to do it, but just shift it into something that's a bit more difficult. The second trigger is about environment. It's about a rich environment, about having as many different things open to people. People know what the task is now. You've set the consequence. So suddenly people can sort of like keep that in mind, but explore as widely and as wildly as you wish. And there are 3 key ways to think about doing that. The first is novelty. Stuff that people haven't seen before. You or the group you're working with or the team. Just stuff that's new. Oh, that's new. Because people suddenly have to process it. They have to think about it. What's new? What's interesting? What's the behaviour in this I can steal? The second thing's complexity. Showing people that it's actually all an interrelated mess of stuff where many different things can be true at the same time, again allows people to engage and to sort of to use those little grey cells to try and work out what's going on here. And then the third one is unpredictability. You have no idea how pleased I was to find a Lego picture of the Spanish Inquisition. Nobody expected a Lego Spanish Inquisition. Sorry. And so it takes us on to the third trigger, embodiment. And this is where I think the cards are working best. It's like, how do you make 10 fingers, 2 eyes, and a brain pay attention? When people are sitting in meetings with phones or laptops or whatever else, etc., how do you get people, all of the senses, to pay attention? It turns out you give them a small slippy card and a permanent marker, and suddenly they get really everything's in. You've got to hold it with that hand, and you don't want to make a mistake with that hand, and you're looking at the thing and you know what you've got to do. So those are the 3 basic triggers. And I sat back and thought, right, okay, so maybe it's just 3 things. Is that just the 3 things? Is that what's going on here? And realised, actually no, because it's about reinforcement. The principles and the method are about reinforcements of these 3 triggers through every step. So for instance, environment is the secondary priority for consequences. In the first step, you're going, yes, it's about setting the clear task. What are you going to do and what happens if you don't? But you can also use environment to back that up and say, right, to find this out, we are going to do this. So you set the expectation of what it's going to be. So we use a lot of, with Smithery, we use a lot of pretending. So say you are going to pretend to be, if you're in a big company, you're going to pretend to be in a startup. Or you are going to pretend to go and work for another company 4 years in the future. You're going to do this like you work in the finance division. You just shift people's expectations to suddenly give them a new perspective on that consequences. And then the embodiment thing becomes the thing you back it up with. You make people write down the task. Because yes, you can sit here and say, does everyone understand what we're going to do? But if you get them to write it down, then people go, well, that is my understanding of the task. And they put it in front of them, and it becomes the object for them to work around and work off. Then you back up environment by using embodiment. So you make as much of the environment that you're working in, whether you're on your own or in a team, physical. Print stuff out, get books, get posters, whatever you want, make it physical. Because the problem with screens is there's no peripheral vision. Everything's laser focused. The thing that's on the screen is the thing that's on the screen. And you can leaf through stuff, but it just becomes really hard to make random connections between that thing over there and that thing over here. That's interesting. Oh, maybe that goes. And then people pick stuff up and move it around. That is something we have not cracked in digital yet. So by making as much of the rich environment as physical as you can, you're more likely to find the seemingly unconnected things. And then again, you back up environment with consequences because you've written down what the task is and what happens if you don't. You have something to refer back to and to use it as a lens to view all the things you're finding. And then finally, for the embodiment piece at the end, you're bringing back the consequences. Why is this the thing that you're making? Why is this the answer? How does it refer to the question and task as set? But also you're allowing people to filter down the best parts of the rich environment. If you've made it physical around you, you can pull it all under the answer and say, sort of, look, this is our answer. It answers this question because of this evidence, because of this other stuff we found. So that basically is a flow engine. It's been, how many days? It's about 23 days old. But I've used it in just about everything I've done since. Workshops, setting field trip goals, just setting little tasks for myself, just as a simple 3-step process for going sort of like, set the consequences. What are you going to do? What happens if you don't? Make a rich physical environment around it with all the different elements you can pull. And then embodiment, making an answer, creating something physical. I think it helps hack the way you work and not the time you have. You enter that flow state and time just flies by. You can do things so much quicker than if you're just sitting behind a screen and working as you normally do.